seconds. We are on the YouTube streaming. Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, Myrle, in few seconds we are starting. We are streaming on YouTube. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning there in Canada. I'm very happy to host this seminar that is titled Indigenous Science and Impact Assessments. We have a special guest, Professor Myrle Ballard. She is an associate professor at the University of Calgary in Canada, and she's also chief of the Environment and Climate Change Canada's Indigenous Science Division. And her approach integrates perspectives for a more holistic understanding of the environment, combining indigenous science and Western science, and also the perspective of non-human entities. The seminar, for those who are connected online through YouTube, is part of the course Environmental Conflicts, Climate Justice, and Social Impact Assessments within the International Master Program Climate Change, Diversity, Sustainable Territorial Development, CCD-STeDe. And I think this seminar, it comes at a good time as COP30 in Brazil is about to start. And I believe that some of the students here already have taken part in some of the previous COP, or at least know about the past COPs. And they surely know that these meetings many times were just full of rhetoric and led to very low contribution to an effective change on the perspective and the struggle against climate change. In many ways, COP30 in Belém, in Brazil, is also at risk of being like of these past COPs. This COP is supposed to be the COP that celebrates the central role of the Amazon and indigenous peoples who now also in this COP have the risk to be excluded because of rising accommodation costs and other dynamics. And also thinking about that we are having that COP there, and there are news, but not just news, about the Brazilian oil company Petrobras as the authorization for starting oil exploration in the mouth of the Amazon River. And so not a good context to have such COP that had a lot of hopes about the potentiality to be there in that context. And I'm very pleased that with this seminar, in this small space that is our course, we can give value to indigenous knowledge. And for this reason, I'm very happy to have here online, actually, Myrle Ballard. And I would like to thank Myrle to join us in this course. And I give you, Myrle, the floor to start sharing with us about your research and your perspective on how to combining indigenous perspectives and Western science. So thank you very much, Myrle. The floor is yours. Myrle, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good morning from Canada, and good afternoon to my friends over there across the pond, as we call it. So I want to thank Professor Alberto for inviting me this afternoon to do this talk. So I'm going to be talking about Indigenous science and impact assessment, and it's regarding the work that I do. So just bear with me here. Okay. Yeah. We all come from a place, we all come from mothers, and it's our moms that shape us, who we are, what we are when we grow up, what we do in society, what we do with our careers, etc. And this is my mother. This is in her new home in Lake St. Martin. We are a displaced community. We were forced displaced in 2011. And to think that Indigenous peoples are still being forced displaced in this day and age. 2011 is only about 2011, 14 years ago that we were displaced. So we were forced evacuated from our lands, which I'm going to be talking a little bit about. So my mother is 91 years old. She just turned 91 in August. And this is her new home. She had her home destroyed in the old community, and she still bakes bread, and she still takes a lot of pride in baking, and she's still very active. And my mom guided me as I was growing up, and she taught me the language which a lot of my work, my work originates from. So I'm going to be talking about Indigenous science. We have to recognize that Indigenous science, Indigenous knowledge, traditional environmental knowledge, and these are different things. And just like when we talk about Western science, in Western science there's biology, chemistry, physics, etc. So with the Indigenous knowledge systems, we can equate that to Western knowledge systems, and within these systems, we have different specialties. And Indigenous science is about the land, but it's not about the land itself. When I say land, it means whatever's on the land, like the water, the air, etc. So Indigenous science is time-tested, it's distinct, and there's methodological approaches as well with Indigenous science. And Indigenous science is about the practices of Indigenous people from way back, and they passed on through knowledge. And when I say that, they're from the past, and a lot of the stories, a lot of the traditions are passed on. And the storytelling, for example, stories of how people lived on the land, those are part of the stories, but they relate as well to the activities that are going on the land. And Indigenous peoples have a diversity of technologies that they use, and the one thing we have to keep in mind too is that technologies are not ancient; they're adjusted to modern times. So Indigenous science is constantly evolving, and it's based on real time. And it's a knowledge about species that are happening, changes that are happening on the ground. I'm just going to time myself here, make sure I don't go on and on. When we talk about Indigenous science and the knowledge of what is around us, it's the knowledge of the forests, it's a knowledge of the seasons, it's a knowledge of the plants, it's a knowledge of different vegetation that's on the ground, trees, the waterways, species, flora, fauna. And this is what we call for Indigenous people. These are our relations, because we don't we're not separate from the land. We are part of the land, and it's our responsibility to take care of the land. And this refers to the biodiversity and the relationship we have. It's relational, and like I said, it's a relationship between the birds, the insects that are on the ground, and the crawling, even deep within the ground, worms, etc., the four-legged, the two-legged, the fish in the water. And it's the relationship we have with the air, the sun, the celestial bodies, etc. When we talk about impact assessment, I took this definition from the Government of Canada website. And when we do impact assessment, it requires gathering information and evidence from multiple sources, including the project proponent, the scientific experts, which are the Western scientists in this case, Indigenous people. These are the ones with knowledge of the land, the public, communities, and other. And then this information is used to identify potential significant harm and ways to mitigate that harm before the projects are built. So this is the definition that I took from the Government of Canada website, because this talk is about Indigenous science and impact assessment. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go back to this definition throughout the talk. So the framework that I developed is the Indigenous Science and Western Science and Our Relations framework, which I named the three-eyed seeing framework. And this is about the relationship we have, our responsibilities with each other, of Indigenous people with their knowledge, of the Western scientists with their knowledge, and our relations, because they have knowledge as well, but they don't define it as knowledge. And the same as Indigenous people, we don't have the word for science, but the term is there so that people understand the relationship to be able to compare within these knowledge systems. So, and this is the three-eyed seeing framework, and I'm going to be talking about this and an impact assessment. So with Indigenous people, we have Indigenous methodologies. We have Indigenous methods, and this is the Indigenous science, which is the knowledge of the land. And it's a people. The Indigenous peoples are the ones that they are the knowledge holders. They are the elders who have this knowledge, and the knowledge holders, knowledge keepers, refer to the fishers, the hunters, etc., the gatherers. These are people who have knowledge, who know the land really well, who know the waters really well. And what I do is I work a lot with these knowledge holders, with the elders. That's how I gather my information. They share their information with me, and then work with the land as well, because of the land, the waters, those are our relations. and then using Western science with that, and that's the three-eyed seeing. So when we do the impact assessments using the three-eyed seeing approach and then the Western, the Indigenous science, when we look at this definition from the Canadian government here, when we do the impact assessment, they're conducted to examine the positive and the negative effects of impacts from proposed projects, whether it's a dam, port, etc. So the gathering of the information for both positive and the negative effects from various sources. When we look at this definition of who to ask of the effects, whether positive and negative, right away we see that there's a gap there for Indigenous people because they are the voice of the land, they are the voice of species. It does not recognize the voice of our relations. So the impact assessments do not ask trees, what is going to happen to you? What are you going to suffer from these major projects that are being developed? It doesn't ask the water, what's going to happen to you? What are the negative positive impacts when these developments take place when you get diverted? So the Western approach to impact assessment does not recognize the voices of our relations. And it's the Indigenous people's voices that carry what the voice of our relations say. So it's important when you do the impact assessments that you include the voices of Indigenous peoples because they're going to speak for the voice of our relations. So when I talk about our relations, it's about the land, and the picture on the left of the screen, you can see the trees and the water in the background, the ground, etc. So these have a lot of voices, the voices of the trees, the voices of the soil, the voices of the rocks, and the voices of the water in the background. And they have a lot of stories as well to share. And the land is we get a lot of our medicines from the land. We still do in this day and age. We get our medicines. A couple of weeks ago, I took my mom out on the land and we got our medicines to prepare for the winter. And the medicines are better than the ones that are store-bought. And usually these store-bought medicines from the pharmacy, they do a lot of damage to the lands and waters because they can't be absorbed. And then they go into the ecosystems where the animals absorb them, and then in turn we absorb them too as we absorb them. But with the natural medicines, there's no harm. The animals, when they eat the natural vegetation here, the one on the left, it doesn't do them any harm because these are all natural. And then we consume, like for example, deer, moose, those are our foods, and the birds that are there as well. And indigenous people looked after the lands. They sent preventative fires throughout the land, and that's the way they managed the land. But policies now prevent fires from managing the land. So what happens is a lot of vegetation remains on the ground, and then the vegetation accumulates, dries up. And what happens is the process of regeneration and regrowth that does not occur. This is my area in Lake St. Martin. We call this region, we call this area Big Rock, because Lake St. Martin, if you look at it on a map, it was formed by a meteor, by a meteorite that that landed there approximately, I don't know, about 1 million years ago, it says. And we have a lot of blueberries that used to grow on this, Big Rock. And then the elders, when they share stories of it, say that they used to camp there, and then they pick many pails and pails, and they described of blueberries, and they camped there for weeks, a couple of weeks at a time, and then they got enough to last them throughout the winter. And then the forest fire bans started taking place. The provincial government does not allow land to be set on fire like they used to. So this there was natural fire that occurred probably from lightning a couple years ago, or maybe 5 years ago. And then as a result of that, new vegetation started growing because the old shrub burned, and now there's an abundance of blueberries again. So the differences between Indigenous peoples' management and Western science management are different. So we need to recognize the importance of Indigenous science and the management and the conservation of and the protection of the lands and species is really important, and we need to incorporate these into our management practices. Wild rice is another important part of Indigenous people's diet and life. We used to go wild rice picking in the Whiteshell Park of Manitoba, and we picked wild rice as a form of sustainable livelihoods. So when we say that word manumin, which means wild rice, and I'm going to be talking about the importance of my language throughout here, I forgot to mention. So when you talk about wild rice, we say manumin, which means wild rice. And then the activity of going to harvest the wild rice is manuminike, which when you translate it, it means the making of rice. So essentially what the Indigenous peoples do when they pick wild rice, manuminike, is they assist the wild rice to regenerate, to grow back on the land, because the traditional activities of picking wild rice includes the use of 2 sticks, and it goes into a canoe, but not all the wild rice goes into the canoe. A lot of it goes overboard, and it goes back into the water for regrowth. So that's part of the relationship, a symbiotic relationship of Indigenous people with water and wild rice. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the research that I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the Lake Winnipeg watershed of Canada, which spans over 3 provinces and extends into the 4th province, northwest part of Ontario, and it goes into a little bit of the U.S. So the Lake Winnipeg watershed is huge, and it comes from the Rockies, and it goes into Lake Winnipeg, into the watershed region of the northwest part of Ontario. And I'm studying 3 different spots in each province, and I'm starting with Lake St. Martin, which is in between the 2 big lakes in Manitoba. You can see the arrow there, Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba, and Lake St. Martin is the little lake that that connects those two lakes. And the Lake St. Martin is where I'm from again. So Lake St. Martin in my language means Ubaskudeang, and Ubaskudeang means where the prairie is. And I'm going to be talking about this research in the terms of a three-eyed seeing and the importance of language. So Ubaskudeang in my language means where the land is clear, where the land is like a prairie meadow. And Paskude means buffalo. Paskude basically means the animals of the prairie. That's what that means, the bison. That's what they're called in my language. So when you think of bison, they roam on the prairies. And my community was named that from the original naming. That's how the region looked like. It was prairie. It was really beautiful. So when you start to look at these names and you start when you start doing the research, the community where I'm from now does not look like a prairie. Ubaskudeang does not look like a prairie. So the research I'm doing is identifying the original naming and the descriptors of the way it was. You can see here what it might have looked like. So identifying what it might have looked like, and then going through the process of identifying these changes over time, and talking with the elders of the different events that took place over time, and the different livelihoods, etc., that they did, and using those stories and the original naming of the place, you start seeing what has happened. This was in 2011 when I talk about my community being forced displaced, forced relocated. The government, the province, flooded us out in 2011 by releasing the water control structure. They opened up the Favorite Dam, which is located upstream to Lake St. Martin, Ubaskudeang, where I'm from. And when that happened, so basically when that happened, decisions are being made, and the impact on the land is not being considered. What the positive benefits are, what the negative benefits are. So when these kind of decisions are being made, because Indigenous people live downstream of the Favorite Dam, none of these were taken into account. The picture on the left is an outlet channel that was constructed in 2011 to alleviate the excess water that was being diverted into Lake St. Martin. So they had to build an outlet channel to divert the excess water. So when these kind of impacts are being done on the land, that they do a lot of damage, and Western decision makers fail to consult with Indigenous people. They fail to ask the waters, what are the impacts of this diversion going to be on your water? What are the impacts of the fish that live in your waters, etc.? The shoreline, these areas, riparian areas were damaged. There was a lot of damage from this flood. You can see the picture on the right side. You can see the natural shoreline. A lot of those trees do not exist anymore. I've documented stories of the Indigenous people who lived in the area where they shared. They used to go to the shores during the summer and spend days there to do their laundry, and they talk about how they used to set their activities, whatever they were doing. They used the natural shade of the trees because it was hot. And there was a lot of berries that grew along the shore too. We call them gooseberries. And they don't exist anymore. They've been drowned. And so when water is like this, and the first dam was built in 1960, again without any consultation, and the land around Lake Martin was repeatedly flooded since 1960, and then another diversion was built to divert the water from Mundus and Boyne River from going into Lake Winnipeg. And the reason for that was that to save the city of Winnipeg from flooded, so that they diverted the water into Lake Martin, where I'm from. The research that I do involves using language, determining the changes. So I do, we look at the soils, we do analysis of the soils and determining what has changed just by looking at the soil and the soil composition. So when you look at the background, this used to be a tree-lined background. You can see there's mostly shrub there now. There's not really that many trees. And the water is regulated by the province. Sometimes it goes high, sometimes it goes low. This is water. This is not ice. This is foam here. You can see foam, and the white part is foam. It's not ice or anything. So that's from the water. So you can see the water levels are very low, and that used to be a sandy area. It used to be a beach, but now it's all full of debris, and because of the water regulation, flooding, and limiting water flows. And behind that ridge is swamp. There was never a swamp there. So we go down the land, and we assess what's on the land, and these are all based on what the knowledge holders are telling us. And then we do sampling of the land. The knowledge holders tell us where to go. And we do ground truthing as well. We identify a spot, and we go from that. Like we do the baseline monitoring of the baseline data. So this is this particular area is called Rabbit's Point, and this area was where the Anishinaabe used it for the transportation, because we have to remember that long ago, before cars and trucks, etc., the Anishinaabe Indigenous people used to use water for transportation, and that's how they got around. So this was the area where they arrived, the main point. So we look at the soil, and we dig a hole, probably about 2 feet, 2.5 feet. This particular location was just towards the lake of where I grew up, where we were flooded from. And you can see the vegetation has changed, and this is mostly swamp here. There's a lot of bulrushes growing here, and this used to be farmland. Growing up, we had hay growing here. We used to have a barn, cattle, etc. So this has all changed. It's now flooded over, and where I grew up, but there's nobody living there. And when you go there now, it's all been encroached by trees, vegetation, and different vegetation. So this particular area on the left, this is where the new community was relocated to. So we took samples here too. And right away, just by digging, we knew right away that these trees were not native to the area. These are relatively new trees. So this is what when you do the indicators, when you do assessments, these are really important to look at because when you do analysis like these, they tell you a story of what the Indigenous people said because they said what the land was like. And sure enough, just by going digging, we were able to identify that these are new growth, that they're not, these trees were not there for thousands of years. So Bashkuteang means land of the prairie, and when changes over the land made by the policymakers, they change the landscape. And the one on the right hand of the screen, this is the old community as well. You can tell that the vegetation is mostly swampier. That used to be a meadow, and people used to cross that meadow to get from one side to the other. We tried to take soil samples from there, but it's very wet because it's swamp now. Before it used to be a grazing field for cattle. It used to have hay, etc. And there were also a few houses there, but now they're not there anymore. So the soil analysis from the Western science perspective, we determine the isotopes that were there that will reveal the plant types, the organic matter, etc. The differences in vegetation from the top as you go down, and the depth of the changes as well. So determining what the changes are within the landscape, the prairies, the grasses. And we're going to be doing the eDNA with the water as well. And using the Indigenous science, the oral history, and the oral tradition is really important. And I just want to briefly talk about this. I know that I've been rounding almost half an hour. But these are really important. This is Lake Winnipeg. This is the area that I talk about. You can tell Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba, and the lake in between is Lake St. Martin, connecting the two lakes where the Anima Bay is, the little lake. There is Lake St. Martin. So where the arrow is pointing, that's where the kind of the two basins, the North Basin and the South Basin, are linked. And the reason I'm pointing that arrow is for you to understand that for Indigenous people, the way they understand the ecosystem, the lands, the water, they always think in terms of the relationship with us as humans. So they think of the lake as a human body with the North Basin and the South Basin. And that narrow part where the arrow is pointing is where the kidney of the lake is. And this is where the filtering process, the natural filtering process takes place. And it's the same way that our body filters waste that we consume, and the kidneys within our bodies filters waste, and they go out, and if it's bad, we suffer the consequences as well too. And this is the same thing for the lake. And there's a causeway that was built in to connect mainland to Hecla Island, which is a little bit south. You can see where the arrow. And there's a causeway that was built to connect the mainland and the island, Hecla Island, and that causeway, the Indigenous peoples describe that causeway as affecting the natural filtering process of the lake between the south and the north. So there's a lot of damage from the effects of from the Lake Winnipeg and discharging its discharging its effluent waste. For example, it's sewage into the lake. Farmers discharging their waste as well into the lake, when, which affects the phosphorus levels of the lake. And there's a lot of algae bloom that is happening on the lake because of all these wastes and toxins that are going on the lake. So the three-eyed seeing, Indigenous people knowing what's happening with the waters. Indigenous peoples are taking it upon themselves to be the voice of our waters, to be the voice of our lands. And there's a few lawsuits that are being taken to court. This one is for the Lake Winnipeg region. The Indigenous peoples are speaking on behalf of Lake Winnipeg, where they're doing a challenge taking to give Lake Winnipeg legal personhood so that Lake Winnipeg will have its own rights and to be able to say, no, I don't want anything going into my waters, going into my body anymore. So this is this was last year, so it's going into the courts. And as well too, there's other court cases that are in the system. The Magpie River in Quebec, in Canada, the Wanganui River in New Zealand. Indigenous peoples have are the voices of these regions, and they want to give the waters legal personhood because they have to be given a voice as well. And water is threatened by industry, dam development, the negative environmental social impacts. And these are the things that when the government does the impact assessment of the industry, they never ask the water, what are the negative impacts with you? So it's giving them a voice. And when we don't do our due diligence, this is what happens. This is my region as well, Lake St. Martin. You can see that there's a lot of dead tree stands. So because Lake St. Martin is in between these two lakes, Lake St. Martin and Lake Winnipeg, Lake St. Martin is the groundwater is essentially, the ground table is essentially like a bathtub. Imagine a bathtub with a plug in, and you allow a drop to drop into the bathtub, drip, 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 drip. Eventually, it's going to overflow. So this is what's happening with Lake St. Martin. There's a lot of waterlogged areas now that are in the region that are affected, which are causing the vegetation to be damaged because the roots are rotting from underneath. That the elders know that the elders are saying that the roots are rotting from underneath, and with the water in the salt basin being contaminated, and there's a lot of algae in the water. There's periods when swimming is not advised in the summertime because of the high algae that's in their area, and this indirectly impacts the fishers as well. And because the algae gets into their nets and it destroys the nets once the algae dries, and they can't clean them. And the warm waters too affect the fish. So for the three-eyed science framework, and when we do impact assessments, we have to consider the Western science, the Indigenous science, and what are our relations saying? We have to ask them, what is the water saying to us? What are the fish saying to us? And with this, we can do a better job in managing, protecting our relations. Indigenous science and Western science, Indigenous science uses Western science. They complement one another, and they complement that they can never fully integrate, but complement, work side by side. And it's important for ground truthing when you do these. It's important to understand the history of the region, the land, the waters, etc. And in summary, it's really important to incorporate the different approaches from research to policy. Listening to each other is really important. Yeah, and that's it.
Okay, thank you, Myrle. So now it's time for questions. Myrle, do you have other slides and you think to go on, or just to know?
What's that? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
And just to know if it's the meat of the presentation, or
You want me to stop sharing now?
no. It's just to understand if we are making a moment of debate.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for your presentation. And so we open the moment for questions, and I think that we can move from that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting. I have a question, like, I don't know, it's obviously like from my Western perspective, but I was wondering, you were talking about like the relations and about listening to the trees and to the waters. And I wondered if you could maybe explain a bit more what exactly that means. Like, if I listen to the trees and to the waters, I'm still listening to them through my human perception. So it's still like really, I don't know if my question makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Can you just repeat the question, please? Just
Have some.
yeah, sorry about that.
I have to repeat the question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can, but I will try. So I was just trying to understand, like, I mean, I understood, but to maybe understand it better, what was meant by listening to the trees and listening to the waters, like trying to understand what they want to say. If it's because I was just wondering, because I was still always like listen to them through my human perception. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. So what then is for example, on the water. When I was growing up, my mother always warned me in my language, "Anagajatunibe, kutanibe." Watch the water, be scared of the water. I will not be scared, be mindful, fearful of the water. So what that means is because water has its own life, its own personality. So Indigenous people recognize what the personality of water is, what the characteristics of water, and that from this they are mindful, respectful of water, because water can kill you. Water can be your friend as well. We all need water to stay alive because our bodies are 60 to 70% water. So this is where because, for example, the knowledge holders, they know the water, they know the temperatures of water, they know what the water is saying. they know the waves, the different color of the waves, and what that means. If there's a foam on the waves, they know what that means. So that's what it means by knowing the voice of the water. And for the trees as well, for example, the trees, I was taught from a very early age to recognize the sound of the leaves, what the leaves mean in terms of weather, predicting weather, being prepared for the weather to come. So these are the kind of things, the way the birds sound, whether they're warning us, species, observing species, what are they telling us? Again, indigenous people, just by knowing species behavior, they can tell what the species are saying. So that's what that means, being the voices. Does that answer?
Okay. Yeah. We have some other questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I was wondering, because you were talking a lot about Indigenous science, but in a lot of the pictures, even the one you're using right now, there's the picture of the boat. And you've shown in a lot of pictures, you used, and Indigenous people were using a lot of Western science. And I'm wondering why, because in my mind, Indigenous science and Western science can complement each other. But I'm getting the sense from your presentation that Western science is starting to overshadow Indigenous science. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on that. Do you think right now problems require... Sorry, I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm getting the sense that, yeah, Western science is overshadowing Indigenous science. I mean, just through the slides that you gave.
No, I don't agree with that. The slides that I gave are about Indigenous science. And I don't talk about Western science. I only talk about Western science when we do the framework for the three-eyed seeing. We use Western science, Indigenous science, and our relations. And I right throughout my talk, I talk about the importance of language, which is the basis for Indigenous science. That's how you determine what the indicators are based on the Indigenous language. Ubaskudeang, what that means. Maybe you didn't understand what Ubaskudeang means. Ubaskudeang means land of the prairie, where the bison once were. So when you take that word, Indigenous word, that Indigenous word is the Indigenous science of the land. And when you start doing monitoring, when you start doing assessments, you have to understand what the Indigenous name is for the land, and from there you start to understand what has changed, and throughout the years, that's changes that have taken place, the impacts, the negative, positive impacts on the land. That's Indigenous science. This is what this talk is about. It's about the Indigenous science, and I'm maybe because I do this talk a lot, maybe I don't. Maybe I need to spell out with every slide Indigenous science, but that takes time. And there's a course that I teach on Indigenous science, and this is just a 30-minute slide presentation.
No, I understand, but it's just that you're using a lot of Western frameworks, and I was wondering why did you choose to use these Western frameworks when you could have just kept it all like mostly about Indigenous science?
No, because the three-eyed seeing is about the three frameworks. That's why, and that's what the talk is about. And I disagree with using a lot of Western frameworks. I disagree with that.
Okay, there are other questions. I think it was before as well. Paula.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I was wondering if you could share limitations that you have recognized of making and using the impact assessment through the three-eye seeing perspective.
Yeah, the limitation would be because a lot of Indigenous people do not speak the language anymore. And if you don't understand what a region is called in the indigenous names, it would be hard to understand. Well, that would be a limitation. And also with water is pretty common. For Anishinaabe language, the term for water is nibe, and that's the word. But for different species, for an indigenous person that does not speak the language, that can be challenging because a lot of times the translation gets skewed and the words are not properly translated. So that could be a limitation. I'm trying to think what else.
I think we have other questions. Okay.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I just had a simple question about understanding really the difference between the indigenous knowledge and the our relations, because in my understanding, the indigenous knowledge is actually our relations with nature. So I'm struggling to see the difference between both dimensions. Thank you.
The indigenous knowledge is comparable to Western knowledge. If you think of Western knowledge, it's the knowledge of everything, the knowledge of childcare practices, the knowledge of the educational system, the knowledge of science. So that's Western knowledge. And if you compare it to indigenous knowledge, that's the same. It's a knowledge, indigenous knowledge of everything. It's the knowledge of traditional indigenous childcare practices, the way indigenous peoples used their traditional governments. So those are the indigenous knowledge systems. But indigenous science I use indigenous science. I don't use Western knowledge because of the differences, and it's really important for the terms that you use to use the correct terms because they make a difference in how the information is interpreted. Indigenous science is the knowledge of the water, is the indigenous, how they manage the water, how they live with the water, how they live with the land, etc., the trees. And that's indigenous science. It's very specific because indigenous peoples know the water. They know, for example, the fish in the water. They know when the current does not flow a certain way anymore, and if the current starts to flow backwards, what's happening? They know something is wrong, and the spawning patterns, for example, with the fish, they know where the natural spawning sites are, but when something is impacting the waters, they know when the fish change their spawning sites. So this is all the indigenous science about weather as well, whether they know about the indigenous science of weather, species, migration patterns, etc. These are all indigenous science. And the knowledge of plants, making plant medicines, there's a science to that they know the formulas, etc. It's about testing, validating, it's all that. But if I start to use indigenous words, you won't be able to understand them. So that's why I have to use Western words so that you understand the integration between, not the integration, but the complementing, how they complement each other.
Okay. You have other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. Because you shared this sort of mixture or complementary between Western science and indigenous science, I really want to know, in your experience, how much of these findings or results from indigenous perspective that you have, for example, applied in this example of environmental impact assessment, how those findings is being received by the Western science. I mean, um, how Western science endorse the production of information from the indigenous approach. If Western science endorse this production of information, this knowledge, and if you can share a bit, how is the perception of academia, for example, or other stakeholders from Western science?
Yeah, okay. I stood up the new Indigenous Science Division. If you want to look at it, if you want to look it up, it's in the Environment and Climate Change Canada's website. So I got asked to stand up the new Indigenous Science Division. They wanted to call it Indigenous Knowledge Division. And there's a reason for that. That's why I keep saying words are so important. The terminology that you use is really critical. Indigenous science, when used with Western science, it has to be respected. If you start using terms like indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, these are terms that Western scientists look down upon. They don't think that the knowledge is as important. So the new Indigenous Science Division exists within the Government of Canada. It's a brand new division that exists, and it's 3 years old, so it's brand new. It's on the website, and it's describing the work that I talk about. That's how why it's there. As well, too, with the University of Calgary, where I am, we're setting up the new Master of Indigenous Science program. It's a graduate level program that's situated in the Faculty of Science at the University of Calgary. And again, recognizing the importance of Indigenous science that's going to be used alongside the Western science, and the importance of it. So it's a brand new program. We should have the first cohort of students probably by 2027. But this is why it's important. What was the question again? Sorry, kind of leading off.
How Western science stakeholders or actors, for example, academia, university leaders, or other actors usually from Western science, have received the findings or the results from Indigenous science. If they endorse them or recognize the production from Indigenous science as valuable or as part of formal science as well.
Yeah, so like I said, the government is recognizing Indigenous science. So if you Google it on the website, just type in Indigenous Science Division. It's under Environment and Climate Change Canada. So they recognize the importance of Indigenous science, and as well too, the University of Calgary academia is starting to understand the importance of Indigenous science. And like I said, the University of Calgary, we're starting up the new Master of Indigenous Science, and Indigenous scholars are really in demand in Canada, especially in the science departments. So Indigenous science is really important because with the legislation as well too, it's important to, especially when you do the assessment, the impact assessment, you have to include the knowledge of Indigenous people. So it's important for both people when doing these kind of assessments to understand both of the knowledge systems, the Indigenous science and Western science.
Hi, Myrle. How are you doing? I was just wondering, because based on your presentation, I feel like something that I was thinking about was that this method or this framework is very helpful because it's connected to the land that it was developed on and by the people that know the land. So I'm wondering, like, for example, if we ended up working, because many of us will probably work with social impact assessments. Um, what do you think is the best way, besides working with the people whose lands, we're on, to try to implement frameworks outside of Western science or complement them with other frameworks? Thank you.
Yeah, it's really important. Like I said, the knowledge systems that are out there, whether it's science or social science, whatever it is, it's important to for the social, like for the Indigenous peoples, everything is holistic. So the land, with the medicines that are on the land, the medicines affect the animals, the people. So it's very important to recognize that when we study Indigenous science, that the people are part of that the Indigenous people, the knowledge keepers, etc. And that's the same thing for the others. When you work with the social sciences, you also have to involve the people because they're the ones that have knowledge of the systems you're working with, whether it's health, um, the educational governance, etc. It's really important to include Indigenous people regarding the work that you're doing and to hear from them because they're going to be the ones that giving the oral history, the oral tradition of anything that you're working with.
Hello, and thank you for this presentation. I have a question concerning this framework, because from what I understood, a lot of Indigenous knowledge and science rely on the land as pedagogy. And in that matter, I was wondering, would you say this framework is possible without having land reclamation also, and for people to have access to their land already? And if it's something addressed within academia or concerning this framework?
Yeah, it's possible to use this framework with Indigenous peoples that don't have reclamation or repatriation, because I think it would be the basis towards that. Many Indigenous peoples, because of the political systems that exist, do not have those systems in place that allow for reclamation, repatriation with their lands and languages, especially policies that hinder that. For example, in Canada, we had the residential schools that took away the language, and within the language, we it's so critical because of the language is at the foundation of everything that we do. It's the foundation of our culture. It's the foundation of our spirituality. It's the foundation of our livelihoods, everything. So when you take away that foundation, it affects everything. But that's not to say that it can be reclaimed, because a lot of Indigenous peoples are reclaiming their language. So it takes work.
Hi, Myrle. I have also a question, but mostly regarding to like the master program that I think you mentioned in the university about Indigenous science. Um, has it already started, and how has been the process of like systematizing Indigenous science? I think this is very innovative. I haven't heard about the master program like relating to this subject, so I was interested to know more about the challenges, who are the professors, how is this the knowledge being systematized to be like to people being able to learn it through a master program. And also when we talk about Indigenous science, I was wondering if this master is also contemplating other type of Indigenous groups, not only the Canadian ones, or is it only like focused on Canadian Indigenous people? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's good questions. The questions are all good, by the way. Each one that asked. We're not done developing the program. Like I said, we're developing it, and we're hoping to have the first cohort of students in 2027. We're 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 in the process of designing what the courses are going to look like, how many courses. But the intent is science, Indigenous science, to be the main focus. I want to see a question. Oh, and it's open to Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. I taught the pilot course in July this past year, 2025, and it was a pilot course. And within a week of advertising, all the spots were filled, but eventually we had to decline. We had to decline 2 students because they were already PhD graduates, and there were non-Indigenous students except for 1 Indigenous student. So when the demand is there. And also, it's not just open to Canadians. We're hoping to form partnerships with various universities throughout the world. So it's open to anyone who wants to take it.
The questions. I have a question. I have a question for you, Myrle. You told us that the importance of the elders in giving and in showing and to be the voice of the rivers, of the plants, of the mountains, the rocks. And what's the role of the young people and the Indigenous young people in this impact assessment? Do they have, I imagine, like in many contexts, young Indigenous people are losing the connection to the land through the loss of the language. What's about that in your experience, in your context?
Yeah, that's a good point. When I talk about the knowledge holders are not the elders, they're a different group of people. So it can include the young people as well, because we know that there's a lot of young people who have knowledge of the land just from being with mentors. There's knowledge that's passed by mentorship. The elders share stories. Knowledge holders are the ones that do that do and work the land, who have knowledge of the land. So a lot of times they have youth with them, and the youth in turn learn about this, and they are going to be the ones. We talked about the next 7 generations. I didn't talk about that, but that's a really important concept, because it's always about the future, keeping what's here now for the future generations, and that too as well is about the passing of knowledge. The elders, knowledge holders, the youth, the knowledge holders are they could be elders as well, but it's mostly the young mid adults, and a lot of them include the youth. They're part of the knowledge holders as well.
Thank you. Okay, hi. Thank you for this presentation. I would just like to know from your experience to now, like, what is the place reserved to indigenous science within the framework of impact assessment? Like, is it considered as a tokenistic, I mean just local knowledge, or it is considered as a co-equal epistemology with its own, I mean, method, values, and yes, a system validation?
Yeah. I remember when I shared the definition of impact assessment early on in the talk, where I defined what the definition was according to the Government of Canada. So it was assessment by the proponents of the impacts, negative and positive impacts, by government experts, it says, and by indigenous people, and by other NGOs. Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question? Sorry.
Okay. Yes, to make just it short, I just want to know the place that is reserved, I mean the consideration of the indigenous science alongside the Western.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I know where it was leading, but I got lost in between there. So remember the definition that I gave in my talk, what the definition of impact assessment was. So if you look at that definition, it doesn't include our relations. It doesn't ask our relations what the negative and the positive impacts are. So that's what's missing, and that's what we need to do as people, citizen, indigenous people, students alike, academics. We need to make sure that we include the voices of our relations when we do these impact assessments. And that's a message I want to bring across, I guess, from this talk, on the importance of the voices of our relations when we do impact assessments.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. I was looking in Google your work about your thesis, which was located around the displacement because of floods in Lake Saint Martin. And well, I was wondering first what kind of conflicts emerged between the community and the government officials when they evacuated this population. Also, and especially, what do you think are alternatives or for displacement in a context where there will be floods that will generate these types of projects in the future? or maybe what mechanisms of participation do you believe are necessary in these cases?
Yeah. Yeah, regarding my thesis, I'm talking about livelihoods and what the impacts on these projects are on indigenous peoples. Because the people of Lake Martin, my people in Anishinaabe, we were displaced. The government failed to use EPIC, free, prior, uninformed consent. Instead, they declared a state of emergency where they could enact force the people out. So in May 8th, 2011, the province of Manitoba declared a state of emergency where they ordered my community to be, they ordered my community out within 24 hours. We were given 24 hours. We were not informed. There was no free, prior, and informed consent. Instead, they used the Emergency Measures Act under the guise of an emergency to force us out because the government was, the province was always after our land to continue flooding our land. They wanted easement of the North Shore where our community was located. So they were after 200 meters of the North Shore of the South Basin to continue flooding whenever they wanted. But the Indians, our people, my people, were in the way. So under the guise of the Emergency Measures Act, that they declared a state of emergency where they forced everyone to evacuate. And it took, we were given new land again without our input. There was no free, prior, uninformed consent. We had no say where our new community was to be located. The government made a unilateral decision. They put us in the adjacent community of the old community where we got forced out from. We were only about a kilometer north of the evacuated flooded community where the government considered it a write-off. And the waters have since receded and the vegetation is now changed. We had no say. We were marginalized, still marginalized. We did not get any compensation. And the list goes on. And that's how Indigenous people are treated in Canada.
Thank you. So the question maybe if there are like mechanisms that you have thought should be part of these types of forced displacement that I believe won't maybe disappear because governments do these top-down projects sometimes. What would you think would change the reception or maybe like make it I know it's really unfair. Maybe just if you think there's a way to make these processes more participative.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to send my publications that were published in journals regarding what the people said, their recommendations towards new land, what they wanted. It's all in writing, documented what the people wanted, but that the government did not listen. We told the government, we told the province what we wanted, what's going to happen to the people. And it's all documented, but the government did not listen to us. It's all written down. If you go to the new community, what we identify was needed in the new community, the government did not listen. We do not have permanent facilities for healthcare. We have a school that's about half of the size of the population. It's too small. We don't even have an office administration building. We don't have a rec center. We don't not have an arena. We don't have any of that. And all of it was promised, but we did not get it.
I'm really sorry for the situation. Thank you so much, and I would appreciate to read that paper. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a few papers, more than one. I think there's about 3. Yeah.
Thank you, Myrle, for the presentation, the inspiring presentation. I also appreciated when you started mentioning your mom and the relations and what your mom gave you and the importance of indigenous knowledge through generations, the possibility to maintain through generation. And I would like to conclude mentioning the words of a beautiful book by Ailton Krenak. He is an indigenous leader. I don't know if some of you here knows already Ailton Krenak. Who knows? He's Brazilian. And he is an indigenous leader. And he wrote this book that is called Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. So since the title, you can imagine the power of the book. And he writes, I remember reading a story by an early 20th century European researcher who traveled to the homeland of the Hopi Nation in northeastern Arizona. He had asked for someone from the village to set up a meeting for him with an elder he wanted to interview. When he went to interview her, she was standing in front of a rock. The researcher waited and waited, then finally said, "Isn't she going to talk to me?" The intermediator replied, "She is talking to her sister." "But it's a rock," said the researcher. "And so, what's the problem?" said the intermediator. So the author wanted to highlight the strong connection between the indigenous people and the land and who are inhabiting the land, not only humans, not only plants and animals, but also what we from the Western perspective call non-living entities. And another quote is, when we depersonalize the river, the mountain, when we strip them of their meaning and attributes we hold to be the preserved human being, we relegate these places to the level of mere resources, industry, and extractivism. The name Krenak, Ailton Krenak, so surname, not just a surname. So the name Krenak is formed by 2 words, Kre, which means head, and Nak, which means land. Krenak is the legacy of our forebears, the memory of our origins, which we identify as our headlands. As a humanity that cannot understand itself without this connection, this deep-set communion with the earth. So here there's also that collective relationship between indigenous people and the land. It's not just the relationship of one person to the land, but it's a collective dimension. And without that dimension, it's not possible for what I understand, for them to have this kind of relationship with the land. So thank you very much again, Myrle, for being here remotely to give us some examples of the work you are doing, and also some perspectives that are different from the ones we are also used to. So thank you very much again.
Yes, Chimigwech, thank you for all the questions. They were very enlightening and engaging. Thank you very much. Chimigwech.
Thank you. Let's stay in touch. Okay. See you.
Goodbye.